19th of September, 1944, near Arracourt, Lorraine, and the night's chill clings to metal. A few American Shermans idle in a hedgerow cut, their crews listening to engines they can't see. The fog makes its own front line today. Through it, a shape, then a second, slides across the gray. Someone whispers, "Panther." No one can see the turret numbers, only the long barrel. The radio net erupts, short, clipped, disciplined. Orders bounce from outpost to command post, to artillery that sits behind a ridge. Guns trained for a map they memorized in the dark. The Panthers nose forward, confident, hunting silhouettes. Instead, they meet the math of dominance. A platoon commander with a radio, a battery with a fire mission pre-plotted, an entire combat command organized to kill fast. The first shot is American, close, banging the Panther's side armor. The second is German, high, shrieking into a barn roof. Then the fog swallows everything, and the battlefield becomes geometry. Angles, distances, traverse times, and the seconds it takes to talk across a net. The Shermans slip using the swell of a field for cover, trading frontal armor for movement, range for position. A forward observer in a Piper Cub hears the fire and throws coordinates. Behind them, M7 priests settle their tracks and fire at muzzle flashes they can barely see. It is 8 in the morning, and Combat Command A's headquarters is almost inside the fight. If the Germans get through here, the salient buckles. If the Americans hold, the day belongs to their system. By noon, the fog will lift and air will arrive. But the day's outcome will already be decided by crews fighting blind and a command post that refuses to lose its map. What the Germans thought would happen was simple. Longer guns and stronger plates win at distance. What happened instead was a grueling close-in knife fight, where radios and combined arms multiplied force. The system on the U.S. side was a chain. Recon to tank, to infantry, to artillery, to air, that let small nodes hit above their weight. The spirit was a practiced aggressiveness. Crews drilled to move, flank, and call shots while under stress. On paper, Panthers should have erased Shermans in open country. Their 75mm QK-42 could outrange most U.S. tank guns by hundreds of meters. In the fog at Arracourt, range vanished. American crews dragged the fight into side-shot distance. The result shocked the attacker. In some engagements, as few as 5 to 7 Shermans or M18s broke up company-sized Panther pushes. The famous retelling says 5 Shermans. Records tie the cleanest example to a 7-tank element of A37th at WWII's 22nd September, wiping out most of a force of 22 for 1 loss. The larger truth is the same. The system multiplied each tank. Patton's Third Army had raced from Normandy to Lorraine, then paused, starved of fuel, and stretched thin east of Nancy. The 13-corps bridgeheads across the Moselle were fragile. Arracourt was the forward hinge, high ground and road nets that made it a springboard if the Americans could keep it. For the Germans, the Lorraine counterstroke promised 2 prizes. Slam shut the U.S. bridgeheads and cut up the armored spearhead that had humiliated so many formations in August. The German answer was 5th Panzer Army under Hasso von Manteuffel, built around 2 new Panzer brigades, the 111th and 113th, plus elements of the veteran 11th Panzer Division. On paper, it was mass. 262 tanks and assault guns pooled for a decisive blow in one sector, between 18 to 29 September 1944. The terrain was rolling farm country, broken by villages, hedges, and ridges, perfect for ambushes once a defender knew the folds. The weather turned the sky into a lid. Fog meant the Americans could not call in their usual air wall. That same fog would erase the Panthers' long-range advantage and punish any attack that advanced without scouts. Both things happened. The German doctrine and assumptions looked sound from a distance. The new Panzer brigades were conceived as quick, hard-hitting units. Panthers to punch, Panzer grenadiers to hold, a small artillery element, and then a swift pullback to rearm. The Panther's strengths were best at 1,000 phi, 1000 max, penetrate before the enemy could hit back. The plan for Arracourt leaned on that physics. The brigades would slip through the fog, find American armor oriented east-west, and hammer from standoff range, avoiding towns and hedgerows where flanking shots lived. But the brigades were new. Crews were fresh from schoolhouses, in some cases with only 2 weeks of training on their Panthers. The formations lacked reconnaissance depth and had not practiced combined arms integration at brigade level. The fog that protectively wrapped their approach also hid bends in the ground and American outposts. They were designed to counterpunch. They arrived to improvise. Opposite them sat a U.S. armored system that favored speed, communications, and modular combined arms. 4th Armored Division's CCA, commanded by Colonel Bruce C. Clark, was not just tanks. It was the 37th Tank Battalion, Lieutenant Colonel Crichton Abrams. Etiwa, Sedadri Takiatotindren, armored infantry, e.g. the 53rd, engineers, and artillery, 66th and 94th Armored Field Artillery, with cavalry screens, tank destroyers, 704th TDBN with M18 Hellcats, and forward air controllers tuned to 99T Tactical Air Command. A typical U.S. combat command could retask companies by radio in minutes. Artillery sat close, often M7 priests that could wheel into direct fire. The Sherman's turret drives were fast, and gyros helped short-halt shots. The 76 mm armed M4s were still inferior in raw penetration to a Panther's gun, but crews trained to move inside that range, pivoting to take side shots. Beyond vehicles, the system was habits. Supply trains traveled with units. Clark overloaded trucks and routinely pushed 7 days of rations to the line, a deliberate buffer for deep fights. Radios linked tank platoons to infantry and guns. Liaison aircraft orbited with battalion commanders talking to them directly. At Nancy days earlier, this network had outmaneuvered larger German groups, and it rode east with CCA into Arracourt. First contact came harsh. On 18th of September, 2nd Cavalry Group screening Luneville slammed into elements of 111th Panzer Brigade and was shoved back in a day-long fight, a prelude to the main event. By dawn on the 19th, fog cloaked the Arracourt salient. Company-sized German thrusts from 113th Panzer Brigade felt out the southern and eastern faces. The enemy used the haze as a shield. So did the Americans. The first volleys were point-blank. M7 priests fired in direct support near the CCA command post as Panthers wandered too far into the perimeter. Tank destroyer platoons and a medium tank company conducted a running defense into the outskirts of the headquarters area, literally fighting among vehicles and signal masts. A U.S. battery fired successive time-on-target missions to break up the most dangerous pushes, and Shermans counterattacked as soon as the German lead elements exposed their flanks. By late morning, the Germans had lost heavily to side shots and short-range gunnery. CCA held. The day ended with dozens of German tanks burning across the fields near Lizay. Contemporary accounts speak of 49 wrecks visible when 37th Tank Battalion gathered that evening, an image of what fog, radios, and good crew drills can do. The Hellcats had their own knife fight in the mist. Near Moncourt, Réchicourt-la-Petite, a platoon from Company C, 704th TD Battalion, deployed when an M18 commander saw a gun tube appear out of fog at close range. Tens of feet, not hundreds. In a few minutes, they knocked out multiple German tanks, then continued the ambush as more panzers pushed into the kill zone, trading 2 or 3 destroyed TDs for a run of knocked-out enemy vehicles. Names and exact tallies vary in retellings, but the pattern is consistent. Fast movers, short exposures, side shots, disciplined fire commands. At Arracourt, the M18's speed and traverse paid off precisely because the Americans refused to fight the Panther's preferred long-range duel. The turning point came when the sky opened. For 2 days, fog grounded 19 meters and masked German assembly areas. On 21st September, the weather broke. P-47 Thunderbolts roared into the Arracourt area and began working over roads, hedgerow lines, and any Panzer concentration they could find. Some estimates credit tactical air, with 73 German tanks destroyed or damaged in the Arracourt fighting span. The exact number is debated, but the effect was real. Columns dispersed, attacks slowed, and every German move risked a rocket or 500-liter bomb. A CCA commander could now pull a radio and request a strike against a grid square he had just fought over. Artillery and air stacked, and Panther crews were forced to move between craters. On 22nd September, Clark and Abrams called their shot. Task Force Abrams, built around the 37th Tank Battalion and 10th Armored Infantry, attacked to retake Jubilees. The hill at Les Trois Croix was identified as key. Company A seized it, and the rest of the task force drove into the town. On those slopes and in the surrounding fields, a numerically small U.S. tank element wrote the battle's signature statistic. A 37th with 7 Shermans engaged roughly 22 enemy tanks. Using the crest and reverse slope, they let the Germans come, then fired across flanks. Artillery dropped behind the Panthers to trap them in the bowl. By the end, Company A had destroyed 17 for the loss of one of its own. 5 enemy tanks slipped away. Numbers to remember: 7, 22, 17, 1. The engagement compressed Arracourt's thesis into minutes, position over plate, radios over range. By evening, sources note that only 7 tanks and 1,080 men were left in 111th Panzer Brigade. That brigade and its sister would not recover their striking power. Arracourt was not just gunnery. It was logistics done fast under fire. Clark's rolling trains meant ammunition was rarely the limiter when a chance appeared. In August, he had learned to carry 7 days of rations and overload trucks by 50% to sustain tempo. Those habits now buffered CCA, while bridges and corps roads back to the Moselle were contested. Recovery sections prowled behind fights, dragging wounded Shermans back for repair. Maintenance sergeants cannibalized in hours what other formations would wait days to requisition. Engineers kept lanes open through hedgerows and culverts. When Abrams shifted a company to plug a seam, C to B to reinforce, or B to run a rescue for baggage trains, fuel and ammo appeared at the new location because someone on the net had told the trains while the company was still moving. The German Panzer brigades, by contrast, were ad hoc. Fuel shortages and shaky repair pipelines meant a Panther disabled in a ditch often stayed there until the attack ended, or until the P-47s found it. Intelligence, command and control made the machine hum. CCA's net-linked outposts, FOs, and commanders. Forward observers in L4 Cubs orbited, calling both artillery and movements. In one episode etched into unit lore, Major Charles Bazooka Charlie Carpenter, who strapped bazookas to his L4, launched attacks that ground eyewitnesses later credited with knocking out German tanks during the Arracourt fights. Claims around types vary by source and require caution, but the pattern is revealing. A culture of initiative blessed by command, pushing information and action to the edge. Above, 19 TAC and ground controllers. Normalized air-ground cooperation. The sort of system wherein a battalion commander could point to a hedgerow on a $125,000 map and know a flight would work it. Underneath, hardware sat human capital. The U.S. 4th Armored had trained together for years with company and battalion-level exercises that turned radio brevity and movement into muscle memory. By September 1944, they had months of combat learning layered on top. The German Panzer brigades were the opposite. fresh units built in a hurry, with new tanks and crews who, sources say, often had 2 weeks' familiarization before combat. They lacked organic recon and had not rehearsed the brigade-level maneuvers they needed. 11th Panzer Division could fight, but it was under strength. The new brigades, though jammed with Panthers, could not translate hardware into synchronized attacks. On Arracourt's broken fields, group practice beat raw aptitude. A quiet doctrine shift underwrote the American win. Refuse the enemy's preferred fight. Every temptation existed to duel at range with Panthers. 4th Armored did the opposite. They pulled fights into 800 millimeters and less, exploited fog and folds, emphasized flanking shots, massed artillery at decision points, and treated air as a hammer once weather allowed. Hellcats were used as fast, short-exposure flankers, not long-range tank snipers. Shermans exploited fast turret drives and stabilization to get the first accurate shot from a short halt. When a company fixed a force frontally, another looped to rake sides. Hunter, Leach, Spencer, Lamison, names that recur in battalion logs. The doctrine was not about a single tank's superiority. It was about a portfolio of tools that made Shermans deadly inside the Panther's geometry. The Germans did hit back. On 19th September, C-37th crested near Leh and drove into a well-laid ambush of tanks and PaK-40s. 6 Shermans were destroyed in the first volleys, even as the company's return fire killed several enemy tanks and AT guns. During the early fog days, American air support was muted, and some panzers drove deep before being checked. The 11th Panzer Division remained tactically competent, husbanding its strength and counterattacking where the brigades had failed. And not every small unit tale is the same. 5 Shermans beat dozens is a powerful headline, but the best documented small unit overmatch at WWII involves 7 Shermans, not 5. Precision matters. The win at Arracourt was decisive, but it was not bloodless, nor was it one-sided gunnery every hour. Roll up the numbers carefully. Over 18 to 29 September 1944, German forces near Arracourt committed roughly 262 tanks and assault guns to the operation. U.S. tallies credit 200 enemy AFVs lost or disabled in the battle window, 86 destroyed and 114 damaged, numbers that fluctuate by source and method. American losses for the period include 41 medium tanks, 7 light tanks, and 7 tank destroyers, formation-level figures that mix several engagements. 19, 18, 8. Tax contribution is variously cited. One frequently repeated figure is 73 German tanks destroyed, damaged by P-47s once the weather cleared in the 21 to 25 September window. The 704th TD Battalion's Arracourt claims cluster around roughly 3 dozen tanks destroyed for a handful of M18s lost or damaged. And then there are micro-numbers that animate doctrine. A-37th's 7 Vs 22 at WWII, 22 to September. Multiple M18 platoon ambushes that traded 1 TD for 3 to 5 panzers in minutes. The exact totals matter. Researchers should audit them, but the ratios tell the story. Small, well-coordinated U.S. teams often achieved Tandru 3.11 kill trades at the decisive point. September 1944. Psychology and command climate shifted as fast as the front. German brigade officers promised a quick punch, found their attacks fracturing in fog, then pounded by artillery and air once skies cleared. Reports note repeated use of the same approach routes, a deadly predictability when defenders had pre-registered fires. American after-action notes repeatedly praise radio discipline and the ability to mass effects. Artillery on call, then tanks at the sides, while German accounts complain of lost tanks to unseen flanking fire and air cannon runs on roads. At higher echelons, the failure to dislodge CCA from Arracourt killed the operational idea. Within a week, the brigades bled into 11th Panzer for reconstitution. The shock was not that Panthers could be destroyed. It was the speed with which thin U.S. outposts, a tank battalion, and radios could turn a German morning attack into wrecks by afternoon. The next months show the ripples. Patton's army did not sprint into Germany from Lorraine in September. The campaign became a grind, particularly around Metz, and the Third Army's resources were pulled and redirected as priorities shifted. But the German armored reserve in the sector had been mauled. The Panzer brigades, an experiment, proved brittle. In the broader campaign, a lesson settled in. U.S. armored divisions that stuck to their combined arms script could stop and reverse larger enemy armored thrusts, even against technically superior single vehicles. Within 3 months, 4th Armored would execute a winter dash to Bastogne that looked a lot like Arracourt in reverse. Systems and crews moving faster than the enemy could re-aim. There is another ledger. Arracourt's villages, farms, and families bore the cost of 2 armies fighting across their lanes. Civilians left homes for cellars and ditches when shells fell. Fields that fed towns burned to hide tanks. Bridges that joined parishes were blown to deter an advance. The statistics we track, tanks, sorties, ratios, sit alongside lives disrupted, property lost, and people displaced by decisions made far above their valley. Any honest telling notes that ledger too. The legacy of Arracourt outlived the smoke. Post-war U.S. doctrine leaned harder into air-ground integration, flexible combined arms task organization, and aggressive use of artillery as the king of battle for armor. The Hellcats story fed debates about tank destroyers. By the 1950s, U.S. doctrine folded the mission back into armor. Training reforms emphasized crew coordination, rapid retasking, and radio brevity, what 4th Armored had done reflexively. Technically, the U.S. moved to heavier armor and guns. But the Arracourt lesson was not build a bigger tank. It was build a better system, where communications, reconnaissance, and logistics ensure your tank is in the right place at the right time, with friends talking to it. Return to the fog. A Panther is just a silhouette without a scout. A Sherman is just a target without a net. On that September morning, the American crews refused the enemy's geometry and forced their own. The famous headline says 5 Shermans beat dozens of Panthers. The documented story says small American teams, sometimes 7 tanks, sometimes a handful of Hellcats, beat larger forces because an army taught them how to connect. The closing image isn't a wreck. It's a field map, a radio handset, and a ridgeline that turned range into angles, and angles into advantage.